There comes a moment in every believer's life when everything they try simply stops working. The plans fall through, the doors close, the prayers feel distant. The path that once felt clear has gone somewhere they cannot follow no matter how hard they try. And most believers in that moment do the same thing. They try harder, they make more dua, they increase their salah, they push past the resistance. They remind themselves that Allah tests those He loves. They call it sabr, they call it a trial. And they stay, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, because they were taught that staying and enduring is what a sincere believer does. And here is the most important thing this video will say to you. Sometimes that is completely right. Some difficulties genuinely are tests designed for endurance. Some doors require persistent, faithful effort before they open. Some seasons of your life are deliberately hard so you can discover what you are made of, what your faith is actually built on, and what you become when circumstances stop cooperating. But there is another category entirely, one that Islamic teaching addresses directly, one that the Quran and Sunnah both speak to with remarkable specificity, and it looks nearly identical from the inside. It is the category where the difficulty is not a test to push through. It is a direction to follow, where the closed doors are not obstacles demanding more force. They are instructions. Where Allah is not asking you to endure what is in front of you, He is asking you to trust what is beyond it. And the reason this distinction costs believers so dearly when they get it wrong, the reason so many sincere, praying, genuinely faithful people spend years in situations they should have left, is that both categories feel almost the same from the inside. Both are hard, both produce discomfort, both arrive without a clear label attached that says, push through this one or walk away from that one. Both send you to the same prayer mat, produce the same tears, and generate the same question, whispered into the same late-night silence, Ya Allah, what am I supposed to do? So how do you tell the difference between the difficulty you're meant to endure and the direction you're meant to follow? 5 signs, 5 specific, Quranically grounded, prophetically affirmed patterns that appear when Allah is signaling departure rather than endurance, not as failures to be fixed, not as obstacles to be conquered, as instructions to be followed. Today, we're going to walk through what those signs are, what they mean in real and practical terms, and why misreading them has been costing sincere believers more than they realize. Sign 1. The unease that prayer keeps returning. There is a distinction in Islamic spiritual understanding that most people have never been explicitly taught, but that changes everything about how you interpret persistent discomfort. There are 2 different kinds of heaviness the believer's heart can carry. They feel similar on the surface. Both are uncomfortable. Both send you to Allah in dua and supplication. Both linger, but they come from different sources. They respond to different treatments, and most importantly, they are communicating different things. The first kind of heaviness is trial heaviness. This is the weight that accompanies genuine tests. Loss, grief, financial pressure, illness, the natural difficulty of building something that takes time. This kind of heaviness is real, often severe, and it requires what the Quran prescribes with such consistency: sabr, patience, endurance, continued orientation toward Allah despite the difficulty. Indeed, Allah is with the patient. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:153. This heaviness responds to persistent prayer. It fluctuates. It has good days and worse days. And crucially, it does not have a consistent relationship with a single, specific situation. It is present throughout your life in that season, not specifically generated by one context. The second kind of heaviness is departure heaviness. And this is the one most believers have been misidentifying for years. Departure heaviness is not evenly distributed across your life. It is specifically and consistently connected to a particular situation, environment, relationship, or direction. You are fine, or at least as fine as ordinary human life allows, when that context is absent. And you feel the heaviness specifically when it is present, or when you return to it after time away. Here is the marker that makes departure heaviness unmistakable when you know what to look for. It does not respond to prayer in the way trial heaviness does. Prayer is the most reliable source of relief available to the human soul. The Prophet, peace be upon him, described it as a form of rest, something he would turn to specifically when difficulty pressed in, asking Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him, to call the adhan so they could find rest through it. Reported in Sunan Abu Dawood, prayer was his relief, his pressure valve, the place that consistently returned him to peace when the world was producing chaos. When you are carrying trial heaviness, prayer typically brings at least some relief, not always dramatic, not always permanent, but real. You rise from sujood with something slightly lighter than you carried going down. Departure heaviness behaves differently. You pray sincerely, completely sincerely, with full attention and genuine heart, and you rise from sujood nearly as heavy as when you went down. Not because something is wrong with your prayer, not because Allah is withholding His response, but because the source of the weight is still present, still active, still generating the heaviness faster than the prayer can resolve it. Unquestionably, by the remembrance of Allah, hearts are assured. Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:28. This is a spiritual law, as reliable as any physical one. Hearts find rest in Allah's remembrance. It works. Unless something in the surrounding situation is constantly reintroducing the weight, the remembrance is designed to lift. The way a container cannot hold water if it has holes, the heart cannot hold the peace of prayer if the surrounding situation keeps draining it. Most believers who experience departure heaviness do not recognize it as directional. They look inward instead, searching for what sin, what deficiency, what spiritual failing is causing the prayer to feel insufficient. And that self-examination is not wrong in itself, but in many cases, the prayer is functioning exactly as it should. The situation is the variable that needs to change, not the prayer. Here is the question to ask yourself honestly. Is the heaviness you are carrying distributed across your life generally, or does it specifically intensify in connection with a particular situation? Does it ease noticeably when that context is absent and return when you go back to it? If the answer to that second question is yes, you are likely carrying departure heaviness. And departure heaviness, according to the consistent pattern of Islamic teaching, is not asking you to pray harder. It is asking you to pay attention to what it is trying to direct you away from. Sign 2. Closed doors that look like bad luck. The single most common misidentification in the spiritual lives of Muslim believers is this: calling divine redirection bad luck. Think about the last time a significant opportunity failed to materialize. The job you were qualified for that fell through. The relationship that held such promise and then abruptly ended. The plan you had spent months preparing that collapsed in the final stages without any reasonable explanation. The path you were walking with confidence that suddenly became inaccessible. What did you call that in the moments when it happened? Most people, even people of deep and sincere faith, call it bad luck, or bad timing, or evidence that they need to try harder, prepare better, pray with more focus. They interpret the closed door as a problem with their approach, rather than as information about the direction itself. The Prophet, peace be upon him, corrected this interpretation with a precision that should stop every believer in their tracks. What has passed you by was never meant for you, and what comes to you was never meant to miss you. Reported in Musnad Ahmad. This is not a consolation. It is a statement of metaphysical reality. What does not reach you despite your effort and preparation was not failure on your part. It was destiny running correctly. The door did not close because you lacked something. It closed because what was behind it was not what Allah had written for you. But there is a specific pattern that distinguishes ordinary difficulty from divine redirection, and understanding it changes how you experience closed doors completely. Ordinary difficulty typically shows measurable response to sustained effort. The resistance decreases over time, skills improve, circumstances shift. The path remains challenging but begins, however slowly, to yield. You can look back over a period of months and see movement, even if it is slower than you hoped. Divine redirection behaves differently. The resistance does not decrease with effort, it may actually increase. The more you push, the more other things connected to that direction seem to go wrong simultaneously. And there is often a quality of completeness to it. Not just one thing failing, but multiple things related to that direction failing in ways that resist any single, fixable explanation. You fix one thing and something else breaks. You address one problem and two more appear. The direction itself seems to be actively refusing you in a way that isolated difficulty never does. And here is what nobody teaches believers clearly enough. Most people only recognize divine redirection as such in retrospect. They leave, sometimes under pressure, sometimes through exhaustion, sometimes because circumstances finally made staying impossible. And then, months or years later, looking back from wherever they ended up, they can see clearly that the closed doors were protection, that what seemed like blockage was clearance, that what felt like deprivation was rescue. And it may be that you dislike a thing which is good for you, and that you like a thing which is bad for you. Allah knows, but you do not know. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:16. This verse is not philosophical comfort. It is a precise claim about the structural reality of divine guidance. Your assessment of what is good for you and Allah's assessment can be in direct, complete conflict. You can love, genuinely, deeply, without any awareness of the harm, something that is quietly costing you the specific future Allah intended for you. The closed doors, in this framework, are not obstacles. They are protection made visible. They are Allah removing options that would have taken you somewhere He has not written for you to go. They look like bad luck from inside the situation. From above the situation, from the vantage point of complete knowledge that belongs only to Allah, they look like mercy. The question is whether you will recognize them now, while you are still in them, rather than only after you have finally left. When a consistent, persistent pattern of closure surrounds a particular direction in your life, when effort repeatedly fails to produce reasonable movement, when multiple things connected to the same area keep breaking simultaneously, when you have been pushing against the same door for longer than honest reflection can justify, that pattern is worth taking seriously as communication rather than dismissing as coincidence. Not every closed door is divine redirection, but a sustained, specific, directional pattern of closed doors almost always is. Sign 3. When your faith starts dimming in a specific context. Here is the contrarian truth that Islam teaches about a strained spiritual connection, and it is the opposite of what most believers assume when they experience it. When your faith starts feeling weaker, your prayer starts feeling more distant, and your connection to Allah starts requiring more effort to maintain in a specific context, the natural first assumption is that something is wrong with your faith. Most believers in this situation look immediately inward. They conclude they must be sinning more, must be less consistent in their practice, must be spiritually weakening for some internal reason, and so they respond by trying to strengthen their faith, by increasing religious practice, by making more dua, by attending more Islamic talks, by holding on tighter to the context they're in, while simultaneously trying to deepen their religious life. And here is what Islamic teaching actually says about this pattern, which is genuinely the reverse of what most people expect. When your faith weakens specifically in a particular context, it may not be because your faith is failing, it may be because your faith is working. A functioning immune system responds to the presence of a pathogen. That response, the fever, the discomfort, the feeling of being unwell, is not the immune system failing. It is the immune system detecting a threat and mobilizing against it. The discomfort is information. It is the body's intelligence communicating what the mind has not yet consciously processed. The same principle applies to spiritual sensitivity in the believer who has genuinely cultivated a relationship with Allah. When that sensitivity consistently registers distress in a particular context, when worship becomes harder specifically there, when the remembrance of Allah feels more distant specifically in those circumstances, when the spiritual life that functions well in other environments keeps faltering in this one, that consistent, context-specific response is not necessarily evidence of spiritual weakness. It may be evidence of spiritual intelligence detecting incompatibility. And those who, when they are reminded of the verses of their Lord, do not fall upon them deaf and blind. Surah Al-Furqan 25:73. The believer whose heart is alive responds to Allah's signs. The response to departure signs is not comfort, it is discomfort. It is the specific unease of a soul that is oriented toward Allah being in a context that is pulling it away from Him. And this discomfort is the sign working correctly. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Consult your heart. Righteousness is that about which the soul feels tranquil and the heart feels tranquil. And wrongdoing is that which wavers in the soul and moves to and fro in the breast, even if people give you their legal opinion in its favor and continue to give you their legal opinion in its favor." Reported in Musnad Ahmad. The heart that is calibrated through consistent relationship with Allah becomes an instrument of guidance. When it wavers specifically in a particular context, that wavering is guidance, not malfunction. There are environments that dim the light of faith by their nature, not necessarily because of dramatic evil, but through sustained, ambient exposure to what is misaligned with the believer's spiritual life. The Prophet described the effect of bad companionship as being like standing near a blacksmith's furnace. You may not touch the fire, but you will carry the smoke. Reported in Sahih al-Bukhari. The dimming happens through proximity, not through dramatic individual choices. Here is the diagnostic test to apply honestly. Does your faith function better or worse in the context you're questioning? And does that comparison hold consistently, over time, rather than fluctuating naturally as all spiritual life does? If your honest answer is that a specific environment, relationship, or situation consistently produces a weaker version of your faith, that you pray less attentively there, that you remember Allah less there, that you come away from that context spiritually lighter rather than spiritually fuller, that consistent pattern is the sign. It is your faith working. It is detecting what your habits and your attachments have been trying not to see, and it is communicating with the only instrument available to it, the felt quality of your spiritual life in that place. Sign 4. The stagnation that staying is creating. There is a teaching from the Quran that most people quote in the direction of effort and personal responsibility without ever applying it in the direction of departure. Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:11. This verse is almost universally applied as a call to inner transformation, to improving your intentions, your character, your relationship with Allah, the internal state from which your actions arise. And that application is completely correct. But there is another dimension to this verse that gets far less attention. It is also a statement about the relationship between stagnation and staying. If the condition you are in is not changing, despite sincere effort and genuine inner work, something about the equation needs to change. And sometimes what needs to change is not your internal state, which may already be genuinely oriented toward growth, but your external situation, which may be actively preventing the growth your internal state is ready for. Stagnation is one of the clearest signals in the believer's life that something structural needs to shift. Not ordinary difficulty, which is part of every meaningful pursuit, not the natural slowness of processes that take time, but genuine, persistent, directional stagnation, the kind that doesn't respond to more effort, doesn't respond to more patience, doesn't respond to honest self-examination and sincere course correction, but keeps returning to the same place no matter what you do from within it. Think about this image carefully. A seed planted in the wrong soil that lacks the specific nutrients that particular seed requires, will not grow regardless of how much water it receives or how much light it has access to. The seed is not the problem. Its potential is intact. The environment is unable to support the particular development this seed requires. And no amount of effort from the seed changes that fundamental incompatibility. What changes it is transplanting the seed to soil where what it needs exists. This is not a metaphor about giving up. It is a metaphor about alignment. Your potential is not the variable in question when sustained, sincere effort keeps failing to produce growth. The compatibility between your particular potential and the specific environment you are in is the variable in question. And when you have decided, then rely upon Allah. Indeed, Allah loves those who rely upon Him. Surah Ali Imran 3:159. The verse does not say, decide to stay and rely upon Allah. It says, when you have decided, when you have done the reflection, applied the judgment, made the choice, then move with full reliance on Allah. The reliance is activated by the decision and the movement, not by staying in indecision. There is something that believers rarely name directly about the fear of leaving a stagnant situation. The familiar discomfort of the known feels less threatening than the uncertain discomfort of the unknown. You know exactly what the current situation costs you. You do not know what departure costs, and that uncertainty, not the actual danger of leaving, but the unbounded uncertainty of what follows, is what keeps most people in stagnation, long past the point where honest reflection would have given them clear direction. Islam addresses this directly through the concept of tawakkul, genuine reliance on Allah. And here is the specific thing about tawakkul that is most often misunderstood. It is not passive. It is not the posture of someone who says, Ya Allah, I will not move until you make the path perfectly clear and riskless. It is the posture of someone who says, Ya Allah, I have done the reflection, I see the signs, I trust your wisdom more than my fear of uncertainty, and I move. The moving is part of the tawakkul. Reliance on Allah without movement, when movement is what is called for, is not faith. It is a form of paralysis dressed in spiritual language. When staying in a situation has produced the same result, stagnation, depletion, the consistent failure of growth to materialize, across a sustained period of time, with sincere effort and genuine prayer applied throughout, the most faithful response may not be more patience. It may be the decision to move, offered entirely to Allah's management, with full reliance on what He has prepared on the other side of the departure. Sign 5. The pattern that keeps repeating because you keep staying. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said something that should fundamentally change how believers interpret repeated experiences. A believer is not stung from the same hole twice. Reported in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Most people quote this hadith as wisdom about external threats, about recognizing when someone or something has harmed you before and being appropriately cautious about returning to the same source of harm. And that is a completely valid reading. But there is a deeper layer to this teaching that contains one of the most practically important truths in the Sunnah for understanding when Allah wants you to leave a situation. If a believer is not supposed to be stung from the same hole twice, and they are being stung from the same hole repeatedly, what does that mean? It means they kept returning to the hole. It means something about the situation kept pulling them back to the place they already knew was harmful. And the repetition of the sting is evidence not primarily of the danger of the hole, but of the pattern of return. The sign repeating is not random. It is not bad luck. It is not evidence that life is uniquely unfair to you. In the Islamic framework, repeated patterns are the most amplified form of divine communication available in the believer's experience. They are what happens when the initial sign was misread, or read but not acted on, or acknowledged and then returned to anyway. The sign repeats because the first instance did not produce the response it was calling for. Think about your own life and the patterns you have noticed. The same kind of relationship dynamic that causes the same kind of pain. The same kind of workplace environment that produces the same kind of spiritual and emotional drain. the same kind of outcome that follows the same kind of decision in different forms across different seasons. The specific contours differ, but something underneath them is consistent. That consistency is a sign. It is the most insistent kind, the kind that has already announced itself multiple times and is announcing itself again with increasing volume, because the response it was calling for has not yet arrived. So by your Lord, we will surely question them all about what they used to do. Surah Al-Hijr 15:92-93. Every pattern of your life is recorded. Every repeated experience is witnessed. None of it is random noise in the Islamic understanding of how divine wisdom operates in a believer's daily experience. The repetition has a source and a purpose, and the source is not punishment. The purpose is not suffering for its own sake, it is guidance. When the same pattern keeps appearing, when you keep finding yourself in the same emotional, spiritual, or practical place, despite genuine effort to change what produced it, the question to ask is not only what you can do differently from within the pattern. Ask whether the pattern itself is being produced by your continued presence in something you were directed away from the first time the sign appeared. This is the most confronting of all 5 signs, because it requires a specific kind of honesty, not about what is happening to you, about how long it has been happening, and whether the duration itself is evidence that a direction has not been followed. The believer who is not stung twice is not the one who is never near dangerous holes again. It is the one who recognizes the hole from the initial sign and responds with appropriate decisiveness, who does not need the sign to repeat because they received it clearly the first time. If the sign has repeated, if the pattern has shown up more than once, in whatever form it takes in your life, that repetition is itself the final and clearest piece of communication. It is not a coincidence. It is not life being arbitrarily unkind. It is Allah amplifying a message that was already sent, because the situation that prompted the first sign has not yet been addressed. What do these 5 signs actually mean, and what do you do with them? Here is the misreading that this entire video has been correcting, stated plainly. Most believers encountering these 5 signs treat them as problems to solve from within the situation. The heaviness that prayer doesn't fix becomes a sign to pray harder. The closed doors become evidence to try smarter. The dimming faith becomes a signal to be more disciplined. The stagnation becomes motivation to push further. The repeating patterns become lessons to absorb while staying in the same place. And the result of this consistent misreading is years of sincere, devoted, genuinely faithful effort applied in a direction that Allah was specifically not endorsing. Islam's actual teaching is not that difficulty always means endure. It is that difficulty means pay attention, and what you pay attention to determines whether you receive the difficulty as a test requiring endurance or a direction requiring movement. The test requires endurance when the difficulty is distributed, general, and responds, however slowly, to sustained sabr and dua. The direction requires movement when the difficulty is specific, consistent, and tracks with a particular situation in a way that doesn't respond to prayer and patience, but keeps returning with the same quality of signal, the same heaviness, the same closed doors, the same dimming faith, the same stagnation, the same repeated pattern. And whoever fears Allah, He will make for him a way out and will provide for him from where he does not expect. And whoever relies upon Allah, then He is sufficient for him. Surah At-Talaq 65:2-3. This verse is describing the aftermath of departure, the way out and the provision that comes from unexpected sources. These arrive after the fear of Allah has been expressed through the specific act of leaving what He was signaling to leave. The provision follows the movement. It cannot be received by someone still standing in the place they were directed away from, asking Allah to make it work there, from where He does not expect. That phrase deserves to stay with you. The provision does not arrive through paths you could have planned from your current position. It arrives through paths that only become visible after you have taken the step. This is not poetic language. It is a direct description of how divine provision operates in the life of the believer who acts on departure signs rather than suppressing them. The step itself does not need to be enormous. The first movement rarely is, but it has to be genuine. It has to be in the direction the signs are pointing. One honest conversation with Allah in sujood, where you stop negotiating and start listening. One sincere acknowledgement. Ya Allah, I see what you have been showing me. I see the heaviness that prayer keeps returning, the doors that keep closing, the faith that keeps dimming in this place, the stagnation that keeps holding me, the pattern that keeps repeating. I trust that you know what is beyond this situation. I trust that you have prepared what I cannot see from here. Give me the strength to follow where you are directing me, rather than staying where I am familiar. That orientation, genuine, not performed, not bargained, not conditional on the outcome being made clear in advance, is where the momentum begins. And once it begins, the promise that was given is the promise that was meant. And if he comes to me walking, I go to him running. Reported in Sahih al-Bukhari. The believer who finally understood what the signs were saying, let me leave you with the picture that all 5 of these signs, taken together, are describing. There is a believer who has been in something too long, not because they stopped caring about their faith, not because they stopped praying, or stopped trying, or stopped wanting something better. They stayed because they were taught that staying and enduring is what sincerity looks like. Because leaving felt like giving up, and giving up felt like a betrayal of everything they believe about patience and trust in Allah. And all the while, through every season of the staying, Allah was communicating. Through the heaviness that prayer kept returning, through the doors that kept closing, through the faith that kept dimming in that specific context, through the stagnation that refused to lift despite genuine effort, through the pattern that kept repeating because the first sign was not followed. This is not a story of a believer who failed. It is the story of a believer who was misreading the language. And the most important truth about divine signs is that they are sent not as punishment, but as guidance. The repetition is not impatience, it is mercy. It is Allah trying again, in different forms, through different experiences, to communicate the same directional truth to someone he loves enough to keep reaching toward. Allah wants to make things easy for you, and He does not want to make things difficult for you. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:185. The signs are part of the ease. They are the map, they are the lighthouse, they are the voice that keeps saying, gently at first, then more insistently, not this way. Something better is waiting where this is not. Recognize the signs. Trust the one sending them. Take the step. Everything Allah has prepared for you on the other side of this departure is already written. It is already yours. It is simply waiting for the decision that makes receiving it possible. If something in this video landed with the specific feeling of being named rather than described, if even one of these 5 signs felt like it was speaking directly to your current situation, stay close to this channel. Every video here is built for the believer who is navigating something real and needs truth delivered without the softening that makes it easy to ignore. Leave a comment with which of the 5 signs hit you hardest and why. Your comment may be exact.